Okay, and I think we're live. Welcome everyone to today's live cast. We have two very special guests online. We have Stephen Hobbs and we have Les Kletke. And today's topic is going to be why should I write a book? Or more appropriately titled, the system, process, and questions that you should ask yourself before thinking about writing your next book. Now, by way of introduction, Stephen Hobbs, he comes to us as a business book mentor. He really focuses on exploring the possibility of writing a book before you commit to the process, basically committing all of your time, effort, of course, your finances, to write, produce, position, and market, and eventually sell your book. And Stephen's going to share with us a very interesting process, or even a map, to help you basically see the future of how your book is going to come to fruition. Les Kletke, as a professional, is a book coach. He works very much in the production side of things. He helps people take that initial idea they have of their book, or several books, depending on the case, get that into a system that he's going to share us with to break down the whole monumental task of writing the book down into a systemized way of really getting that your voice, getting your message out into your audience. And he's also a ghostwriter. So for those of you that have considered or thought about writing a book, but consider the task to be either too daunting or want to have more involvement with somebody during the process, then he also has that. He also works with people at that level as well. So to kick things off here, Stephen, as I mentioned just very quickly in the introduction there, over the phone you mentioned to me you had a system in place called 248 that I thought was really quite interesting. So perhaps you could just start off by telling us, what is the purpose of the 248 system, and then quickly walk us through the individual steps before we get to a more practical application.
Sounds great. And just to place the 248 model in its use is, from a mentoring point of view, what I'm doing is having a chat with the prospective writer and saying, okay, before you commit into all the resources of time, effort, and money, what is it that you need to think about to be able to get ready to go into the full writing process? And I know that that's where Les is going to pick it up a little bit later. So I'm going to just bring up the screen and just show you the model. All right, so to be able to make this work, the to part actually refers to this thing called if and CR. Now the if refers to the imagined future. In other words, you have a reason why you're wanting to write this book. There's a purpose for going down this road, to be able to create something and to be able to give it to others. And what you're attempting to do is figure out, is that reason big enough to be able to put all that time, effort, and money into the process? And obviously what you're doing is you're comparing that against where you are in your current reality. What's actually happening for you right now? What's life like? Oh, have I written a book before? No, this is my first time. Am I going to write a series of books? Oh, well, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I'm going to be doing this sort of comparison between the if world and the CR world. And they are going to be going back and forth all the time. Now, as we get into what's called the for aspect of the model, we're talking about outcomes, goals, plans, and insights. Now, the outcomes are, why is it that you're writing this book in the first place? Is it for visibility or credibility or authority or position, or it's just something you've always wanted to do? And what you're doing from the outcome point of view is you're trying to say, okay, am I a researcher, reporter, a releaser, a flyer, a reinventor? There's other reasons that you're doing. So let me just explore a couple of those. A researcher, maybe you've found something that's of really great interest to people. You've researched a number of topics about how to develop a wellness program in the workplace. Well, that's the researcher part. The reporter is, maybe you've talked to 50 people about a wellness in the workplace. And so what you're going to do is you're going to figure out the outcome of the book linked to this reason that you're writing the book. And then what happens is you start to look at the goals, all right? And the goals are what you want to have happen as you move through the process. And so what it does is it starts to give you the first glimpse of what you think you're going to be doing around the work that's ahead of you. And from those goals, you're going to create the plans. And there could be a plan, or there could be a number of plans, and you could be basically setting up activity by timeline plan, or you might set up a process map of who's involved with the writing process. And from that, you're going to then come up and figure out what are the insights. So if I follow these outcomes, goals, and plans, what's most likely to happen for me? And what you have to do is be very open to exploring what happens for you personally, because it's quite the journey that you're going on. Having been on it a number of times myself, then things like patience, flexibility, and discretion start to really raise their head. And so if you've got your 4 aspects, that's sort of like moving from the eagle to the if and CR to the bird view on the tree, which is the 4 aspect, and then you fill it in as you move through the 8 aspects. And I'm just going to very briefly suggest is that from an outcomes to goals, you need to figure out the story that you're going to be sharing with people about the book. In other words, how are you going to enlist them to get involved with you? And then what you're going to do is look at the directives, okay? What are the broad directives? Where am I going with this? Is this a 6-month journey, a 1-year journey? Is it a certain kind of book that I want to write for a certain kind of audience? These are the broad directives because they give you your goals. And once you have those goals, and what we're talking about here is getting down into that squirrel level of work. So what you're doing here is you're looking at the measures. Is this a case of how many words per day am I going to write? How much money can I put into the system? What is it that is going to be measured that's going to keep me on track of what's going on? And again, that notion, is this a 3-month, 6-month, 9-month, 12-month kind of project? Those are measures. The bottlenecks is to take a look at what's happening in your life right now, because maybe in the next couple of months you might be going on a trip. Well, that might take you away from your writing process, or maybe it might enhance it. But there's a bottleneck that's possible there. Do you have to do more research than you thought to be able to get to where you need to? These are things that could slow you down, and you need to think about them. And then as we turn the corner, having created the plans from this outcomes, goals, plans point of view, you have to start figuring out what are all the systems that are involved with the writing practices. All right. What about things like book cover? Who will print the book? These are systems-related items, and these are things that Les will talk about. The process is just getting down into that deeper detail. If you're going to use a certain book cover design group, how long is it going to take them for do it? How many proofs do you have to go through? How many ideas do you have to give? Those details, getting down into that. And obviously you're learning these insights as you start to put it into action, which brings you around to this notion of practices. And the practices are, what's the wise practices associated with creating a book? Could be like, how many chapters? What's each chapter called? Number of points per chapter. These are all the things that Les is really great at helping you to identify. And also, you know, making sure that you've got that title sorted out for yourself, because a wise practice is a great title.
It was the squirrel part of it that caught my attention. It seems that that's where I get involved with when we get to the squirrel perspective of it, and gathering the nuts and putting them together. And not to make it sound too daunting, and I think for a lot of people, especially when they look at their first book or sit down to do their first book, when you go through those 8 items, it's almost overwhelming. But just keep in mind that there are people that can help you along the way, and there are systems in place. It's not quite as daunting as it may seem when you look at all of the things that have to be done. And they do come along kind of logically, and while it's not an entirely linear process, they do fall into place, and you do one stage at a time.
Yeah, and that's true, Les, and that's why from a mentoring point of view, I just walk everyone through all of this just to give them a sense of what's going on so they can make those basic decisions and then turn them over to someone like yourself. That's the best way of looking at it. And sometimes instead of looking at it as a circle, you can look at it as climbing a ladder. And then once you get into it, it's sort of like using them like a climbing wall. These are all the handholds that help you get up the wall. By the time you're done, you've covered them all off.
Great analogy, and that's how I would rate the role as a book coach, is that we help you get finished.
Yes.
Help you get to that top rung of the ladder, and I got to say, the top rung, the ultimate idea of writing a book is that book launch day. That's still a lot of fun, and I've written a number of books myself, but it's still a great thing for me to go to a client's book launch. I don't know of any event that's more fun than that final step on the ladder when you do have your launch and people show up to buy your book and you're signing copies. That's a pretty big thrill because that validates it. That makes it feel that it's all worthwhile. There are people that want to take your message home with them, and ultimately that's what writing a book is.
Oh, for sure. And that's that dream of the if world. I imagine this future of me sitting there actually putting my name in the front of those books and having people come up to me and being able to share some aspect of that book in front of a group. That's that imagined future.
And that's the big why, right? That's what Stephen Covey would call starting with the end in mind. Stephen, is that correct?
Yes, that's having that big, poignant why that's out there for you, and it varies for every person. And that's why, again, one of the things I'm always doing is helping people understand where they are in that whole concept of creating the book and putting that why together for them.
And the why people write a book is as diverse as the people themselves. I don't think that there would be any two authors that have the exact same motivation. Certainly there's some that do it for financial reasons. There's some that do it for career advancement. There's some that do it to help other people, what I call standing on the shoulders of giants. And there's some that need to reinvent themselves, and the writing a book is actually a cathartic process, kind of a healing thing as they go along the journey. So there's no right reason, or there's no one thing that has to be the most dominant reason. It's a combination of a lot of different things that encourage you to write a book, and it's when you think that through and work with people like Stephen to help you discover why you want to write a book.
Writing process opens up all new, really beautiful insights about who you are as a human being. I've written a number of books, and each book has given me a different perspective on who I am and what I know and what I'm sharing with the world. And when you're open to that, not just, oh, okay, I got to get the book written and down and all that, but actually just be open to what's going on. That's a wonderful insight. It's a great point, Les.
I have a question then. Have you ever been in a situation, this question is for both of you, where a client came to you and they didn't know why, or hadn't clearly defined their why, and then that had a negative impact on the process going forward when they weren't either clear or didn't take the time to define that?
Les, do you want to go?
Have I had that experience? Countless times, probably as often as there are people that show up with it clearly defined. So I'd say about half of the time. But that's the role of people like Stephen or myself, to help you figure that out, to ask the questions that help you discover why. We can't provide the answers. We can help you find the right answers that are inside. And a number of times with clients that have come to me in that regard, we've figured out what they want to include in their book, and a number of times have changed their career paths, particularly for speakers. All of a sudden they develop a new keynote speech that revolves around the discussion that we had. What is their passion? What's the message that they really want to get out to their target audience? And so it helps them develop the rest of their career as well.
And I'll just use one example. The chap started off with thinking he's going to write A, and he ended up writing C. And it was because he started to switch it halfway through, and I kept saying, please be aware, once you start switching it, it influences the whole process. So instead of something to be 6 months, it became 12 months. And so that's why I developed the 248 model now. I having gone through that one time in field of my own, I went, no. There's a better way in which to do this. And so I said, okay, I'll just mentor them through that cycle one time, figure out what they need to know, and then get someone like Les involved, because that's the best way in which to do it.
And if I could just add to that, clients that show up or that when I start working with them, they have 2 or 3 books and they can't decide which. I give them the grid system, the grid that I use to develop the books, and say, okay, put your ideas in each one, and you don't have to go through the feeling of I'm never going to write this book, I'm throwing this material away. Start to develop the grid for that book, and you have that feeling of, okay, I'll get to that next. So then it's okay, and they can focus on their first book. But I offer them 2, and I've had clients that I've given them 3 grids at the same time. So in fact, they're putting their ideas into 3 different grids for 3 different books right from the get-go.
Just so they don't feel like they're losing out during the process, right? Like having to give something up. Is that correct?
And that's tremendously important, because if they feel that they have to put that away, that it's being lost, then they can't concentrate and they don't feel as good about the book that they're working on. So this way, they know that it's in the holding pen. They know that it's there next.
And that's an excellent point. So that's like one of those wise practices that you want to work with, and that's again where the book production coach takes you down into that squirrel level, getting down in there and figuring out what's going on so you don't lose anything.
So we talked about the IF, now going back to your diagram there, Stephen. So we talked about the imagined future, which was the big Y. Now the next step, we had CR, which is the current reality. So starting with you, Stephen, can you talk to me, what's the impact or the impact that has in the writing process or the discovery process, and some situations you've had that have been rather important?
Okay, there's always this sort of battle between those two, right? They're overlapping each other. They're going back and forth all the time. And being able to sort out that imagined future really is that very beginning piece for people. And once they've got that clear in their mind, then the rest of it all unfolds. So, give you an example. I'm helping one CEO with a software service platform, and he didn't quite know where he wanted to go with the book. He's read all the books that are in support of it, but he didn't know where to go with the book. So I said to him, well, what's something that's really of interest to you in your life? And he says, well, I'm a coach. I'm a sports coach. I said, well, what would happen if you wrote the book as though it was a playbook? And he said, oh, okay, for an imagined future. I said, well, what would happen if instead of thinking of playbook as a sports book, play as in fun? And how can you use fun aspects in writing the book, but also fun aspects in the book that people are reading can actually have fun with it? And he went, oh, that was kind of interesting. And so what I've done is I've helped him develop a number of models and games and things like that he can actually link back to the book. And that was all just came out of the imagined future. And that's, you know, obviously we've got to go into all the details and all that goes with that. But that was taking his current reality of being a sports coach and putting it into his imagined future and connecting those 2 aspects. He thought it was great, and that's what we're working on.
Interesting. Les?
And by the time they come to me with that situation, and I spoke to a lady earlier this morning who has a history in the horse racing business, and her topic is about etiquette. And I said, okay, we got to focus on this. Are we writing a horse racing book, which is intended for horse racing fans, or are we writing a book about etiquette where we use horse racing examples? Well, when you ask her that way, she was very clear on it and said, it's an etiquette book and I want to use horse racing examples. Well, that's great, because that appeals to a much broader audience than just a horse racing book, but it allows her to include her passion about horse racing. And even those of us that are only marginal, you know, that have never placed more than a $2 bet on the triactor in the 4th race can understand that and relate to those examples. Now, my role as a coach is to keep her on track with writing an etiquette book and explaining the horse racing examples, not getting too far afield or off on a tangent on horse racing, but still allowing her to have that fun and using her passion so it doesn't seem like research.
Okay. So we've gone through the imagined future, current reality. Stephen, introduce the next step, and again, sort of its importance and then its practical application.
Well, again, just the outcomes aspect of it. What are the intended outcomes? Am I looking at a 100-page book? Am I looking at a Kindle book? Am I looking at an academic book? Right? Am I looking at having the book ready for Christmas? Am I looking to have the book ready for September? These are just outcomes that you've got to get a sense of. Outcomes might be is my proposed budget for this is going to be $10,000. My proposed time is 6 months. These are the outcomes that you want to work from to be able to set this up for yourself. So I just use the example is to go back to the one chap that I was working with. Remember I said he went from, we thought we were going A and we ended up at C, so we went from 6 months to 12 months?
Yes, yes.
Well, the outcomes sort of shifted a little. So we had to adjust some of the timelines, and that posed a bit of a problem because he has a special event coming up, and we have the book production process that became, instead of something that was sort of out here, it became very narrow, and that starts to pose its own problems for that person.
But there are some times where you're able to find somebody who is able to help you out and squeeze those timelines just a little bit, who might be able to open some doors in the production side of it and help you with some things. It's not fair to the viewers, but I'm pretty familiar with Stephen's example on this one, and yes, we will deliver the books on time.
Yeah, and that's where you have to find a great book coach and production person, and that's one of the other outcomes that's necessary, because if you don't have that person who's going to support you going down that last stretch, boy, I'll tell you, it can be a slippery slope.
And especially the first time. That's where I wish that I would have had somebody hold my hand much more the first time. If I would have known how big the book production business is, or all the things that are involved, I wouldn't have gone down that road on my own. As it turned out, I was too far gone before I realized that I couldn't turn back, so I just plowed ahead. And then someone said to me, you know, you've got this knowledge, you've gone through the book production cycle yourself, now share it with someone else. Don't make people go down that road by themselves. So that's why it's just easier. Talk to somebody like Stephen, talk to somebody like me, ask the questions, and that doesn't cost you a lot of money. Just ask people questions. People in the book business are more than willing to help you with the process. They'll answer your questions, and you'll know what you don't know, which is the most important thing at this time.
Yes.
All right. Very good advice indeed. Stephen, let's go to the next one, which is after outcomes. Is that goals that comes next?
Yeah, we'll go to goals, because in between goals is the stories and directives. Those are just starting to flesh out your outcomes to goals. The goals is just, we know that if you write goals and you write them down, put them down on paper, put some measures with them, and you place energy and your intention into them, that's what helps you to move through the process. So I just use phrases like to have a book published on such and such a date, to have a book of 300 pages, to have a book on Kindle ready to go, to just put it into words that you can sit down and you can look at whenever you need to just be able to get a little boost and go, oh yes, that's what I'm going to have, right? And rather than just sort of letting it flying around in the ether, you've actually got something to look at, read, and measure against.
So when you do have those kind of goals, it just makes it so much easier to ask the questions. Now, if you know that you want a book of 300 pages and you want it by a specific time, now when you come to Stephen or to myself, you want a book of 300 pages, I can tell you that that's 75,000 words. So that you know. Too many people, they don't ask those questions in the beginning, so they never know when they're done. If you want a book of 200 pages, it's 50,000 words, and that's 25 chapters of 2,000 words each. Once you have those kind of goals written down, it's easy to get the answers and break it down to bite-sized pieces.
And so just so I clarify for myself and for everyone else that's watching this, the difference between the outcome and the goals really is the outcome, that's the general, what you want to do with yourself, your business, your career, whereas the goals are really down to the more detail-oriented stuff, right? Like what, like Les, you mentioned how many pages is a book going to be. Is that correct? I mean,
yeah. The outcomes are just a sense of looking at that imagined future and bringing it back towards your current reality, bringing it back to where you are right now. But the goal is writing them down and being very specific in how you're writing them starts to get your mind focused on what it is that's going to happen. And it's to Les's point, is it allows you to ask the questions you need to ask. Okay. Because then that leads into the next one. Should I go into the next piece?
Yeah, that's a great segue. Please continue.
Yeah. The notion, once you have the goals and you're asking the questions, then you can form the plans. And the plans are just really your ability to say, okay, what needs to happen by what days? So I'm just as an example, okay, you might say, okay, here are the 20 activities that I know that I have to get done by month or by week, and you just create what's called a Gantt chart. It's just one of those ways of putting your details down. Another way might be a process map where you say, okay, who has to touch this book as it goes through? Well, the editor has to touch it, the book production person has to touch it, someone who's creating the title page has to touch it. Who has to touch it? Because each touch can slow things down sometimes, right? And you need to be aware of it. So once you've figured out what your plans are, then what you're able to do is say, okay, well, let me get ready to implement it. In other words, I'm going to pull the starter trigger on the starting gun, and I'm going to step out, and I'm going to make it happen. That's what the plans are about.
And you just feel much more confident about it when you've done that Gantt chart or whatever system you use, so that you know that it's going to take 2 weeks here, it's going to take 3 weeks there. Whereas if you're going into it blindly, you think that you've been really pushing yourself to get this copy written, and now it sits on an editor's desk for 2 weeks. You're a little frustrated. Whereas if you have that timeline, if you know how many people are going to touch that book and roughly how long each one is going to take, it just gives you a feeling of the whole process and allows you to fit into it better. And you realize that being an hour late on finishing your copy isn't really going to matter that much when it sits with an editor for a month, and you want that editor to do the best job that he or she can, so you don't want to be rushing them.
It's almost like setting the expectations in advance is what I'm hearing. If you know what the plan is ahead of time, then it alleviates any sort of frustration or uncertainty in the process.
Not any. You never alleviate all of the frustrations, but we sure make an effort to reduce the frustrations. I mean, this thing is never gonna be absolutely smooth. So you expect some bumps, but that's the way relationships are. And in fact, you do have a relationship with your book coach, with your editor, and with the printer. That's what makes this thing work, and that's why it's so great to see the finished product, because you know all of the people along the way that you've established this team. You've built a team that has helped you get the book to that book launch, and that's a big part of the fun, at least for me. What do you think about that, Stephen? Isn't it great to know how many people have contributed and that it came together?
Oh, couldn't agree more, because each person adds a little bit of different refinement. A great editor, wow. Can some of your phrasing around and you just go, wow, is that what I meant? Oh, that's kind of interesting. Right?
Yeah. And I've worked with people who at first are, and I know of one lady in particular who used the editor that I recommended, and they got off to a stormy beginning to their relationship, and the writer felt that the editor had changed her copy too much. She didn't recognize it, and she didn't think that she could work with her. I encouraged her to stay with it. Well, just give it a try. And by the end of the book, she was exactly what Stephen said. She was just saying, wow, I can't believe I said that. She polished my words so good, so well. Wow, is that what I wrote? And that's what a good editor does for you.
Yes. And someone who can come up with a really great book cover design. Whoa, there is a talent, right? Because knowing how to create it so that it sits as a thumbnail on Amazon, how does it actually sit you know, on the bookshelf. These are things sometimes we just don't think about. We think, oh, okay, we'll just put a book cover together and up. No. There's something, there's an art there, right, to be able to have that happen.
Absolutely.
And the art, there's to me, there's more art that goes into the back cover, because and that's something that people often overlook. But on average, people spend 6 to 7 seconds on the front of the book and then turn it over and look at the back cover. And I would encourage anyone to pay attention the next time that they see a book and how they handle it. You look at the front cover and you say, okay, it caught my attention. Now I turn it over to find out what it's about. So when you're designing the back cover, when you're choosing the copy that goes on the back cover, that's tremendously important. It's not just the back cover of your book. That's the back cover of your book. That's what's important.
Never judge a book by its cover, is that right? But by its back cover, is that what we're hearing today?
That's kind of where I'm going. Yeah, that's exactly it.
So never judge a book by its front cover.
No one does. No one does.
But and to highlight Stephen's point, it's absolutely true. Now in terms of marketing and promotion on Amazon, what they see is only that they do see the front and the back cover. When they have it in their hand, obviously they flip it over, but the image is really important. Absolutely.
Yes.
Can we segue into the next one here, Stephen?
Certainly.
Well, before we go, I'd just like to say that if we're doing a hardcover book or you know, the physical book, one of the things that I worked on a book for a retired doctor from Newfoundland, and it was his memoirs. And what we did is, or his daughter found his original prescription pad from when he started out in a practice in northern Newfoundland in the 1950s. She found that prescription pad, and we incorporated it into the front end sheet. That's the inside front cover of the book. So when you open the book, when he was signing it, he was in fact signing on his original prescription pad from the 1950s. That's a tiny, tiny thing, but it had so much impact on that book. And those are the kind of things that if you have a few people along the way that have some experience, that have some ideas, make a tremendous change. Did it change the copy on the interior of the book? No. Did it set the frame, the mental attitude that you had when you were reading the book? You bet, because when you opened up that cover, he had signed it to you personally, and it was on his original pad. Like, it was just such a nice touch that set your mental attitude to reading that book.
Absolutely. In fact, you know, reading a book is really a special experience, and I can imagine writing one would be even more so. So, Stephen, let's. In the interest of time, do you want to segue into the next one for us?
Yeah, just very quickly, the notion of insights. And Les gave a really great example there. Even the person's presence in signing the book, there's a joie de vivre, there's something that comes alive even in the book launch by using that prescription pad. And that sort of transfers over to the people who are going to actually read it as well. So it's a really beautiful piece around that insight that's gained from it. But also, as you go through the book production process, in other words, you're now writing, you're getting ready to do cover titles, those are all insights about, okay, do I do it again, or don't I do it again? Or if I do I do a book that instead of 300 pages, maybe what I'm going to do is 10 Kindle books of 30 pages. Maybe that's how I'll do the next one, because it makes more sense for my thought. These are insights that come to you as you go through the process. And those are really important as you circle around the full 248 model as you move forward. So, as an example, the chap I'm working with in the current book, what he's found is that I encouraged him not to include interviews in the first book, but he chose to include interviews in the first book, and because he saw he had an insight that they would add to the story. And I said, okay, well then, if we're going to go that way, that's great. But we talked about the second book being sort of case examples and interviews. but he chose to include some of it in the first one. But he continues to do the interviews so they can get ready for his second book, but he's going to shift because of his insights how he's going to do the second book. That's what I mean about insights, is to be constantly learning about yourself, about the process.
Actually, I'd be really intrigued.
You got to have a plan. It's like you got to have a map, but that's just so that you can make changes along the way. I think it's imperative that you have this long-term plan of, this is what you're going to do in your trilogy, in your series of books. That's tremendously important. But that just allows you something to change from. And just as this client, his second book is going to be entirely different, or somewhat different than the original plan. But he can only do that because he had a plan in place.
Any more examples of insights? Because I'd like to hear more from your experiences on how this impacts the process.
Well, another insight that came about was the person having read the first draft of his book, because he has a ghostwriter supporting him on a book. This is another client I'm working with. And I remember I mentioned about this idea of a playbook. And so instead of it just being a simple book that would be coming out that would add into the mix, he had this insight that was shared through the ghostwriter about, oh, that's an interesting way of doing it. I hadn't seen that coming, right? That insight alone shifted how he did it, which actually shifted how he presents his software service to his potential clients now. By going through that process, he now figured out that play was actually something he was missing from his presentations, right? How much the fun it could be by using the software. So it actually extended from the book actually into his marketing.
If I could offer one more insight, it would be to write the book as you do it. And the greatest example of this is Ken Dryden with the game. Ken Dryden, when he was a goaltender, wasn't writing the book, but he was writing all kinds of little things and all kinds of scraps of paper and recording things so that when he did sit down to write the book, he had those notes. I worked with the Olympic goaltender from the women's hockey team, Sammy Jo Small, and she did the exact same thing. So that when we sat down to write her book, she had all the notes that she had written from the specific Olympics or from certain points in her life and journaling along the way. Where I really learned this is I worked in Russia for a summer, and when I went back to look at my notes, the notes from the beginning of the experience were what I missed from home. Then there was a gradual transition as to what was kind of interesting about this country and what I was fitting into. And the third and final part of the time, the final segment of the book, is much more about understanding the Russian society and the people that I was living with. So unless you write it at the time, you do not get that transition of attitude. I learned that from my experience in Russia. And when I was working with a lady that was going to coach oil executives in Oman, I insisted that she write along the way. And no, she was going to write it when she got home and write her book at that time. And I said, no, because at that time your attitude has changed and you will not be able to record or recall what your attitude at the beginning was. So she relented, and in fact she sent me a chapter every week through her journey, and it was interesting to see the change in attitude from what she was missing at home as she fit into that society. Now, in that particular book, she also sent me a postcard every week, and we included that in the final copy of the book, so that at the end of each chapter there was a postcard of what she had seen that week and written in her own hand. So that gave an insight into her changes over the 6-month period that she was working there and that she was writing, and it also gave a really interesting visual as to the things that she was doing. But the fact that they were written in her own hand was a real nice touch.
Wow, great stories.
And it's those reflection points that a writer needs to be aware of, right? because that's what helps you to become a better person, become a better writer, and to create something that's going to be of significance to the world.
Okay. We could go on that topic, I think, for quite some time. Let's continue on. I think we only have one or two more steps left. Is that correct, Stephen?
Well, actually, we've gone around the 2-4, and if we go back into the 8, those are just, as I say, you start doing the squirrel work, getting down into the details aspect of it. If people are paying attention to the 2-4 aspects, go through that one round first time. That's where a mentor can really help you out, someone like myself. And then when you start to go back around it again, that's when you need your book coach, book production coach, to get involved with what's taking place.
Well, one thing that really piqued me about the 8 part was the actual the systems and having a system for writing. And I know, Les, we were talking about one of the systems that you have in place for writing. Could you perhaps share a little bit with us about one of those strategies?
The system that I use, and I call it ISRI. It's 4 component parts, so that each chapter has 4 component parts: an introduction, a story, the reason, and the impact. So each chapter has that same format. But just to go back, before we apply the ISRI, the first thing that when I deal with a client is I ask them to define their audience, and down to the point of giving them a name. So we go through the whole process and decide who we're writing for, whether it's male, female, and that doesn't mean that it has to be restricted to either one, but primarily, and then their age group and their education background, because that determines the level and the style that we will write. So we take the time at the beginning, define who we're writing for, and a lot of times I call my character Stanley. And once we know who Stanley is, well, then that makes it so much easier all the way through. If we ask ourselves, how will this help Stanley? And if it doesn't help Stanley, it's not in the book, because everybody has much more material than they need to fill one book. It's a matter of staying on target and keeping it effective. So once we've defined Stanley at the beginning of our process, we're always writing for Stanley. And then we know the format and the language that we'll use. And so now that we go through, it's easy. We have Stanley in mind. We write an introduction that takes Stanley to the place where the chapter is going to happen. We write a story, the signature story that we've told our friends, that we've told on stage, that we've told so often we're familiar with it. We write that signature story. And then we write the reason. Why did this make the list for our book? Why is this important to us? What change did this bring to us? Why is this event important? And the fourth part is the call for action, the impact. What you wanted to have Stanley do. What's going to make Stanley get up off of the couch? And what I ask writers is, how can Stanley use this as early as tomorrow? Because readers are only reading the book to get something out of it. They want entertainment, but they want something that they can use. So keep that in mind. And it has to be something that Stanley can use as early as tomorrow. And that keeps him reading. That keeps him turning the page to the next chapter.
Well, how detailed do you get? Like, you're essentially creating an avatar, is what I'm understanding. How detailed do you get? Like tell me exactly how detailed is Stanley, for example.
Stanley is as detailed as I can get the client to be. I mean, Walmart, if you've been to Bentonville, Arkansas, and the headquarters of Walmart, they have the cutout of their perfect client. They have a cutout of Cindy. She's 5'3". She's blonde. She's got 3 children. She drives a Chrysler minivan with a dented rear quarter panel. That's how defined Walmart is for their customer. So if we can do that for our client, we should follow those same steps and have the exact same thing, because the more we understand who Stanley is, the better we can write for him, the more meaningful the book is for him. It'll speak to him, and that's what this process is about.
And I agree. the whole avatar concept is so important. When I'm creating my own books, I've got Jim and Jennifer at the executive level. I've got Oscar and Olivia at the middle manager level, and then I've got Michael and Margarita at the starting up into the organization. And each one of them has their characteristics. And to Les's point, I'm writing to which one, depending on the book, or even a blog post. That's what I'm writing to.
I'm working with a lady in Germany, and Jürgen is the manager, and so yeah, we focus on Jürgen so that it's a familiar name for her, that she can really visualize who that guy is at the boardroom table.
How personal does this get? I mean, would you guys be willing to share one of your characters? Like Les, can you share Stanley, and then Stephen, can you share like the exact profile so that we can give people an idea of how detailed you've gone through this process? Can we share that today?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I mean, I would hope that everyone that I work with, or even if I don't work with them, that people can define this to the point of, I mean, Stanley. I worked with a fellow from Vancouver whose Stanley was an engineer. He dropped out of Waterloo in southern Ontario, had some depression problems. Stanley battled with alcohol and had one attempt at suicide, and got around that. And now Stanley he married later in life, has two children, and they're just finishing high school. So yeah, you bet. Pretty detailed, I guess, is the answer. Very detailed is the answer.
Yeah. Stephen?
Well, I'll share Oscar, who's a middle manager, married, has two kids. They're sort of in the 6 to 9 bracket. He has the house with a single garage, even though they got 2 cars, so one has to stay outside all the time, right? In a Calgary winter kind of notion. The kids are doing great, but they got a lot of activities. However, Oscar's wife has decided she wants to leave her present place of employment and looking at setting up an entrepreneurial activity out of the home. So now he's trying to figure out, does he stay in his current job, or does he look for a promotion for more money? Yeah, these are the things that you're talking, because these are the things that are going to come to Oscar's mind about what's going on, and will he use the ideas that I have in one of my books, even my blog post. I have to write from that perspective.
It's very, very powerful, and I just want to give people an example of how detailed it is, and really the examples you gave, I think, would touch even people listening and watching this right now. So thank you for sharing. So what do we have next then on the end? So Les, we talked about defining who you're writing for, how important that is. Let's go on to the next step here in terms of either the systems or processes.
Well, in the first meeting that I have with clients, that's what we do, is we define who we're writing for. And then, and there's some flexibility, but like I've said a number of times, you have to have a map so that you can change direction. You have to have a plan so that you can change from it. In my mind, a book is 50,000 words. That's 200 pages in a 9x6, your average business size book, the kind of thing that you would see in an airport. So we're targeting 50,000 words. So to me, that's 25 chapters of 2,000 words. So the first thing that you should do is then sit down and make a list of the 25 concepts that have to be included in your book. And it doesn't matter whether this is your memoirs, or whether this is a business book, or whether this is an advice book, or whatever. Make a list of 25 concepts that have to be included in the book. Those are the 25 most important things. And then now you've created your table of contents. Those are each going to become chapters. And we know that each chapter is going to be 2,000 words. So now we write 4 component parts of 500 words each, and that way we can do a chapter a day and get a book written in a month. but you have to have this guideline. Now, as Stephen talked about earlier, there's a lot of people that are going to touch this book along the way. But at least when you have this in place, you know that you can write that manuscript in a definite amount of time, and you know what you have to do. Not everyone is going to write their book in 30 days. So what I recommend is that you try to do 2 or 3 chapters a week. And I just refuse to work with anyone who won't commit to writing a chapter a week. Because if you can't find the time to write a chapter a week, you're not really serious about this, and you lose the flow. There's no continuity in it. So, and even at a chapter a week, you'll get your book done in 25 weeks. So you can get your book written in 4 months, which is still pretty amazing compared to most people. When you talk to them, they say, "Yeah, I've been meaning to write a book for 20 years now, and I'm going to start next January." You can actually get it done in 4 months. You could still have a book done this year.
That makes a lot of sense. And how does the process work, Stephen? Like it's like at some point when you started off this client down this road, Les gets involved, as you talked about earlier, in the book production side. Do you still stay involved with the whole process? Is it hands off at that point? How does it work between the two of you in terms of one client and then 2 coaches, if you will?
Well, I'm going to use that "it depends." Because some clients, what I would attempt to do is say, okay, I'm going to now turn you over to the book production coach, and they're going to take you through. You've got it all written. They're going to find the editor. They're going to find the book cover. They're going to put it all together for you. I'm going to turn you over. And what I'll do is I'll just stay with you every once in a while, just see how things are going, how you're feeling, and maybe give you a little moral boost, or, wow, hang on a minute, it's taken me a little longer to get that out of production than I thought, and have to help them sometimes navigate that, because as you're figuring out to give birth to your book, you start to have questions that start to pop up for yourself. Some clients, I'm actually book managing it, and I'm the one who things are going through, right? Which starts to get, you can appreciate how many touches now that are starting to go. And I discourage that as much as possible. But for some people, that's what gives them the confidence that it's getting done the way that they would like to, because they started working with me a year back, sorry, and now they want to keep working with me. So that's a possibility. But I prefer to turn it over and let the person who knows best to take it and help the person finish it off.
Well, I really hear a team approach happening there. We talked about earlier. We have you mentioned that your role would be the mentorship side. Les, you're talking about the actual book coaching. For example, at some point, an editor would get involved who isn't even on this webinar right now. So that person at some point would have the most involvement with that client. At some point, it would be the printers. I mean, is that correct? Am I ballpark?
You're absolutely right. And Stephen had a brilliant answer with "it depends," because that's the answer. It depends on the client. And I've outlined my process, and I've said that it's 50,000 words and yada yada yada. But that's only a plan, and you have to have some place to start. It depends on the client, and we'll make something work that's right for you. It's not a matter that you have to fit into this template and your book has to work like this. This is an idea, and here's a place to start if you've got nothing else. If you have an idea of where you want what you want your book to look like and how you want it to end up, that's just great, and we'll make it work. The idea is that we do what fits for that specific client. It is not a template that you have to fit into.
Okay. I'm going to end off with actually interesting. I haven't told you, but I'm going to do this, but I want each one of you to think of 2 questions that people ask you. Sorry, 1 question that people ask you on a regular basis. What's a frequently asked question? And the second question, second thing I'd like you to share with us is what's a question that people don't ask you coming into this process, but you think that they should be asking you. So, Les, if you could start off with one of each. Start off with a question that people frequently ask you about the process, and then a question that people don't normally ask you, but you really feel that they should be asking.
The frequently asked question is very simple. Is how do I get a publishing deal? Okay, and the answer is you're not. Don't count on it. Count on self-publishing, and if a publisher comes along and recognizes your book, bonus. But we have to make this budget work as a self-publisher and doing this on your own, because working with a traditional publisher adds about 2 years to the process. And unless you're Bill Clinton or Al Gore, the days of getting a big advance for your book don't exist anymore. It's going to cost you just as much money, so move ahead on the time frame. The should-ask question is, how do I work with an editor? How do I find an editor? What does an editor do? And the answer to that is whatever you want them to. Editors are notorious for providing different services, so you cannot compare their services and price-wise. But and I say it's a lot like dating. You don't necessarily marry the first one that comes along, so find the editor that is right for you, that provides the services that you want, and keeps the book in your voice. So what I recommend to my clients is sending out the same chapter to 2 or 3 different editors so they can see the voice and they can see what the editor does for them, and then choosing the one that keeps the chapter the most in the voice that they want published.
Excellent, excellent advice. Stephen, now we put it to you. So again, the first is, what's a question that you get on a regular basis, people frequently ask you? And the second thing is, what's a question that you think that people should be asking you about or during the process?
Well, the question that I get most is, how do you write a book? And okay, it's, they've seen I've got a number of books. They see books all over the book. Well, how do I write a book? And that's when I take them through the 2-4-8 model and say, hey, listen, these are the things that you need to be thinking about, which is what I was doing at the very beginning. The biggest question that I think that people really need to ask is, why am I writing this book? And be very clear about that imagined future for themselves. Because they may have it in one perspective, and then chatting with me, I might give them another perspective, and then we got to find where we're meeting that. Not to say, okay, you got to fit into my template, and that's a really great point that Les has made. But to be able to give them an opportunity to really dig into that why question. Because if the why isn't big enough, the how ain't going to follow.
Right. Good point. It also it kind of begs the question, though, too. I think we're all assuming that everyone should be writing a book. But are there instances or situations where you think that really a person shouldn't be writing, shouldn't be going down this process, either in general or at this point in their lives?
I've had two discussions this year where at the end of the conversation we have decided that this is not the right time for that person to be writing a book. So absolutely. And sure, I'd like to help people write their book, and that's how I make my living. But at the same time, I want to provide good advice. And when we go through the initial consultation, if it's not right for you at this time, if there's no market, and if it's not going to help your career, then don't write a book just because somebody said you should write a book. It's got to be right for you at this time.
There has to be that passion that goes with that, and if that's not there, then don't step into it, because it will start to hurt after a while, and that hurt just isn't worth the time and effort to go down. I think to a point, though, that Les made earlier around the use of notes, right? Keeping your notebook, keeping your recipe cards, your sticky notes, getting out a shoebox and putting them all in there, right? That's what I advise to people, and then say, okay, come back and talk to me in 6 months from now, and let's see if you've got enough material there. If they come back with an empty box, you sort of go, let's see. You want to write a book or not? And you got evidence now to be able to share with them about what might work.
All right, gentlemen. Well, I think we're at time, and I just can't think of the amount of value that you've both been offered. You've offered people listening today, both in terms of your systems and processes, but also sharing with your unique experiences and some of your personal details, especially with the avatars. I found that very interesting. Just so you know, we will be leaving some contact information below this video, some links so that you can get in contact with Les and or Stephen, just down here below. And Stephen, if it's okay with you, I'd like to also leave a link. People could download that PowerPoint slide so people can see that even while they're watching the webinar. Would that be okay with you?
Certainly, certainly.
Excellent. So again, all the contact information will be below this video. Just want to thank everyone for watching, and thank both you, Les, and you, Stephen, for taking the time to sit down today and have this conversation on why should I write a book.
Sounds great. Thanks, and thanks to you too, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care, guys. See you soon.
All right, take care.